We keep hearing that government is supposed to be transparent, except some people in government don't want it to be transparent. From the Secretary of State's office, the Deputy Director of the Secretary of State, Suzanne Staiert. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Peg Perl's from Ethics Watch.
Thank you, John.
Now, we're usually opposed on pretty much every issue.
On a lot of issues.
On anything that's important, I'm right and you're wrong, and that's kind of the way that's always been. But on this one, amazingly, you're also right, which is we should have transparency in government. Why is that important?
Well, I think government transparency is the most important issue, and so we're right where it counts. And it's in order for the public to be able to know what's going on in government and to be able to fully be involved in the government that represents them, it's important for them to have access to the not only just the records that are available on websites, but also things that might be held in government computers but not publicly available on the web.
The idea it's our government. We should be able to see what it's doing. You know, we get to see our own checkbooks. We should see the checkbook of government. We get to see this. We have an open records law. We also have an open meetings law, which means if government gets together to make decisions, they have to let us know they're making it. Tell us about the open records law. What does it say, roughly?
Well, currently the open records law says that records that the government holds are open to the public, subject to a number of exceptions. The problem that has been articulated, and the problem that we've tried to deal with over the summer, is how those records are delivered. So currently, governments hold a number of databases or other electronic records, and people who come in and request those records may want them in that same format so they can search them or they can use that data for some purpose that they need their computers. And currently, the records law don't address that.
So let's go back 50 years. All right, let's pretend we don't have computers. Everything's on 3x5 cards. If you wanted to see what was going on in the books of your government, you'd go down to City Hall or you write them a letter and say, I'd like copies of these things. And assuming that wasn't an executive session or a legal matter or personnel matter, they would have to get you copies of it and mail it to you. We don't do that anymore. A friend of mine has a son, and he had to send a letter, and it was returned. And the father looked at it and had a 3-cent stamp. He asked his son, well, why do you have a 3-cent stamp on it? And he said, well, went to the post office, they had a machine there, and that was the cheapest one. Why would you spend more than 3 cents for a stamp? I mean, so we don't know how the next generation does things electronically, and government does things electronically, but they don't have to give us that information electronically, right?
That's right. Unfortunately, most of our Colorado open records laws here haven't been updated since the time of 3x5 cards and file cabinets. And so what we're trying to do is modernize them instead of leaving it up to the good graces of whether certain government agencies have decided in their own policy manuals to update it and send things by email or other more modern technological ways of doing things, and instead have the current state law be brought up to speed with current technology.
And we found this at the Independence Institute. You probably found it at Ethics Watch. I've heard it from reporters over and over. One example is going to the universities, and they all funnel up to the Department of Higher Education, and we're asked for payroll numbers or something. One school would give us a CD with all the information on it and call up and say, did you get everything? The other one would give us a bunch of papers, and we'd have to transpose those. Others would say, come on down, bring a photocopier and go through our records. How hard is it to put things into an electronic form for a constituent or a reporter or anyone who wants to see what's going on in government?
So one of the big issues for government has been, one, whether they have the equipment to do such a thing. And what I mean by that is a lot of governments need to protect certain data. So it might be personal information of somebody who submitted something to the government, or it may be metadata that's contained within any kind of an electronic document that shows everybody who's ever edited the document, when the document was created, all those kinds of things. And so those are the things that cause a lot of angst to government officials who are trying to protect information that we're required to protect. What the bill that we have proposed this year that we think is a really good compromise to that, it provides a lot of exceptions. And the issues of metadata have really been updated along with other electronic records. It's now very easy to take an electronic copy, take the metadata out of the copy by converting it into some other kind of file, and then still giving it to the person in an electronic format. So that's what we're trying to encourage people to do, and to not be quite so frightened of this metadata type of analysis.
And it is odd when you have so many different political players all saying the same thing. All right, we got the Secretary of State's office. Mind you, your job is information. I mean, you get down to the basics of it, the Secretary of State, you hold information. That's your job, and to make it publicly accessible. We've been ideological enemies on lots of issues, but on this one, we come together and say, let's do it right. We talked about this a couple of years ago. We brought it down to the legislature, and I'm always amazed how much lip service politicians give to open government and open records until there's an opportunity to actually expand it and make it easier. And then for some reason, they just don't like it. What is the reason they usually give?
Well, I think that the real reason that some of them do go ahead and give in hearings is that once in government, you actually are subject to these laws on the other side. And so the concept that you might have to search your computer or go through a bunch of emails to respond to a citizen request feels daunting and perhaps feels maybe a little bit intrusive. And I think that the citizens have to remind them about the job that they are there to serve and how that works.
It's a lot easier if a politician, to make it that easier, just puts a server in his or her basement and then keeps her own server. I think that would be a good way to solve that.
Well, that's, all our legislators here at the Colorado Legislative Assembly use private email. We don't have a government server for their private email, so you can ask them how each of them do it. But I think what's also an issue, and it is a real issue, is a cost issue sometimes for different levels of government and different offices. The concern about metadata or other things is there. One of the things that we have brought to the table and talked to people about is, look, the citizen is interested in things that the government is already keeping in electronic form. This isn't about going back and taking old records and turning them into some sort of new digital document for me necessarily. But if you're already using a program and it's already in your computer form, there shouldn't really be an incremental cost to get that to me.
I can see how, let's say it's a city councilman, and he gets a letter from a constituent or email that says, by the open records laws, I want to see this, this, and this, and every email you've ever sent that mentions cupcakes. And so now, beyond everything else I've got to do, I got to go run a search on my computer and compile all these emails, bundle it up, and give it to this constituent who's only doing this to try to embarrass me or come after me politically. I can understand why they don't want that.
But that's not necessarily always the case, and you don't even know why the citizen might be asking for things. We have a standard in our law that basically it's public documents that have been created on public time by public officials, and you only are allowed to ask for things that have to do with public business anyway. So if there's some sort of private addiction to cupcakes, that's probably not relevant to your official business. And so these are really government documents that belong to the people already and were created with taxpayer funds. And so whether it be the elected official themselves or whoever they have already on staff to help them with their technology, that's something that really is already part of what the citizens should be having back and forth with their government.
For representatives from particularly smaller governments, keep in mind there are 3,600 governments in Colorado, from cities, towns, school districts, special districts. They go, we're a small government, and every time we get one of these things, I got to take somebody off of their job to go and put together a package for open records requests. This is daunting. Now, if it's going to be electronic, I'm going to have to then convert this stuff. You just said it. This is going to be cumbersome. It's going to be a burden.
I mean, maybe. I mean, what they have to compile and what they have to go through, that exists and is true in law right now. Converting a document is actually incredibly easy. I did it myself before I came on the show. I took an Excel file. I took a drop-down menu, I said save it as a comma-separated value file, and I went back and I had stripped all the metadata out of it in 2 minutes. Built into the Excel program, it was not a difficult task, and so I think anybody who uses Excel regularly, I'm not one of them, but I would imagine anybody who does probably already knew how to do that. So to say that it's daunting to then convert it into some sort of file that gets rid of the metadata and protects your other personal information that you may need to redact is not that burdensome. Those are things you already have to produce. You already have to go through those materials, and then it's the last step of turning it into a file that somebody else finds more usable.
Is there a way for the government to ask for to get paid for doing this task, or is this supposed to be a free task?
Yes, there are some fees built into the law. Like I said, there is an understanding that a lot of this information has been put together at taxpayer time. So the law is set up with fees that can be charged for certain things. For example, if you have paper copies, you could be charged 25 cents per page for sort of the printer and the ink and such. For these digital records, what we're talking about is really more about the time to research and retrieve and compile the information. And the law currently would apply as well, even in the new system. And that is that for the first hour, if it takes less than an hour, there's no charge to the constituent. If it takes more than an hour, then there can be a fee set by the local government up to $30 per hour for the time spent researching, retrieving, putting that together.
You mentioned 25 cents a page. And I have seen that over and over used as a way to discourage people from this, which is, I'm sorry, I can't give you this in electronic form. I can only do it in pages, and it's going to take 1,000 pages at 25 cents a page, and people go, I can't afford that. You know, does this proposal that you're bringing forward, does it say if you can do it electronically, you have to do it electronically?
Yes, that is the major, I would say, philosophical change that this bill brings to the law, which is if a requester asks for it electronically, then in general you have to give it to them unless there are some certain very specific conditions about technological abilities that are built in for the custodians. But otherwise, in general, if you can give it electronically, you have to give it electronically.
Is there a bill now to do this? Who's going to carry it, if you know that yet? Is this real, or is this just a hope?
No, this bill was introduced a couple of days ago. It's Senate Bill 40. It's being carried by Senator Kafalas and co-sponsor is Senator Gardner. The House sponsor is Representative Pabon. So it has been introduced. It does essentially what we have discussed when it comes to the fees. Those fees are able to be recouped by the government for any costs related to providing a zip drive or related to programming or anything that your IT department spends. Those are actual costs that you can get reimbursed.
Suzanne, thank you. Peg, thank you. Tell a friend, listen for me on KHOW Radio, read me in the Denver Post, and we'll see you next week right here on Devil's Advocate.